seeking communal or institutional affiliations, much more seeking personal fulfillment, personal reflection, and if they don't get it in the Jewish community, they very easily will seek it elsewhere, or even if they do get it in the Jewish community, they will seek for it elsewhere, because one can be this and also that in an environment that is permissive and pluralistic. And you're absolutely right, to the extent that when asking about affiliation, I believe this time, for the first time, people were not asked only do you belong to a synagogue, but then also asked do you belong to a Jewish community center or to a Y, even if you don't belong to a synagogue, because formal religious association was no longer deemed an adequate measure of connection to the community. So there are very important qualitative changes, and you've hit on them, and I thank you for that. Please.
Actually, further to this point in a similar vein, there clearly is a rise in the other group of people who don't belong to a particular movement or denomination, and these other people are still doing many religious practices. The decline in membership organizations, Hadassah, Federation, JCCs, Neighborhood Women's American North, and so on, is clear on the decline. On the other hand, religious practice, as you're saying, is not. The NJPS survey certainly shows that the various manifestations of religious practice, whether it's having a Seder, fasting on Yom Kippur, Shabbat candles, Hanukkah candles, and even visits to Israel, these things are not on decline, anything they're on increase. So what you have is a changing pattern of religious practice rather than necessarily a declining one. Now, what I find is especially interesting is if you look at those families that have intermarried, even their levels of religious practice are fairly high. I think something like 40% of intermarried families fast on Yom Kippur, which is sort of a phenomenal number. And that's something we shouldn't write off intermarried families that quickly, when they show a certain amount of Jewishness. Similarly, the question of, you talked about Christmas and Hanukkah together, if I remember rightly from some of the surveys that have done about intermarried families, is if they do keep religious practice, they tend to keep more Jewish practice than you do Christian practice. So you have a high incidence of lighting candles on Hanukkah than you do of actually having a Christmas tree.
Yeah, it's true. The other side of that coin is that among children raised in intermarried families, only 1 in 4 is raised Jewish. I'm not talking about affiliation or practice. I'm simply saying identity, and only about 25% is raised Jewish. I think it's important for us to take account for these changing patterns, which may require that we sort of revise many of the assumptions and many of the premises upon which even these sorts of surveys are built. There can be no doubt of that. Many years ago, be with me 1 second, many years ago, Marshall Schnall, in pioneering work, talking now about 40 and 50 years ago, suggested that there is a difference between religious ritual that is regular versus occasional, and that those who would affiliate with ritual more likely would choose occasional rituals, such as the Seder, which happens only once in a while, or or lighting the Hanukkah candles, or even fasting on Yom Kippur, as opposed to the regular rigor and discipline of religious ritual. The other point he noted was the difference between those things that were private and those things that were public. Public ritual was more likely to attract affiliation. If by public he simply meant something that wasn't done on one's own. If one didn't attend the Seder, then grandma made a phone call and wanted to know why. If one didn't light the candles on Hanukkah, then you were sort of left out of what was going on. Today, I'm not sure that grandma would make the same phone call that her grandmother would have made if somebody missed the Seder, so I'm not even sure that that phenomenon impacts. More recently, studies have borrowed that terminology and suggested that there's a difference between ritual and ceremony. Ritual being the rigor of regular practice, ceremony being the large, formal program that accounts for an occasional level of affiliation, but that does not prevent one from continuing on his way in a variety of other contexts. And that what we are missing today for ritual, really what we are replacing it are life cycle events in which a ceremony occurs and perhaps even a rabbi is invited to officiate, but which does not have nearly the same kind of, doesn't impose itself in nearly the same way as ritual. Mr. Weisbrand, do you want to say something?